Gary Stearman, welcome to another edition of Prophecy in the News. Today's guest, author Bill Salus, author of the book Psalm 83, The Missing Prophecy Revealed. In a moment, I'm going to ask Bill how he came about that title. Bill Salus, welcome to Prophecy in the News. Always good to have you here.
Gary, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Bill Salus, Psalm 83. Now, Psalm 83, what does that have to do with anything? Why did you name a book Psalm 83?
Oh, because it's not Ezekiel 38.
Okay.
No, well, it's an ancient prophecy, and you and I have shared this on your shows before, written 3,000 years ago, that I believe is a prophecy for our time. I believe that what we're watching, going utterly chaotic in the Middle East, is directly related to what's going to happen in Psalm 83. I believe it's an imminent prophecy dealing with the Arabs that share common borders with Israel and the terrorist populations within those borders that are going to want to ultimately confederate together, form a devious plan to destroy the nation of Israel. And we're told in verse 4 that the name of Israel will be remembered no more. Cut them off from being a nation. Verse 12, that they can take over the pastures of God. They can have another Arab state. They could call it Palestine.
Well, I'm looking at Psalm 83 here, and as I look through it, it's kind of a prayer, and it begins, "Keep not thou silence, O God. Hold not thy peace, and be not still, O God." Now, that's a request of God. Someone is praying to God, don't be silent. Speak out, God, because we have enemies. And these enemies have taken crafty counsel. They're trying to destroy us. And so this whole psalm is sort of a prayer on behalf of Israel for God to come in and to deal with those enemies. And at least that's the way I view it. Now, you've written a book about Psalm 83, and in great detail you've gone through this enemies list, if you will. And you have pointed out how it greatly resembles what's going on at the moment. Mm-hmm. And as we make this broadcast, events have reached another tipping point in the Middle East. We have Jordan, we have Syria, we have Egypt, we have the United Arab Emirates, we have the United States, we have Russia, Iran, all poised to come together, but nobody knows how or when or under what circumstances. Bill, it's very confusing, and on that basis, let's go ahead and kind of see if we can make sense of this whole thing.
You know, we have to always start there when it comes to Bible prophecy. We can get the details of the prophecy. We can count on the fact that it will be fulfilled 100% toward those details, no matter what the prophecy is. But how we get there, how that gets orchestrated, what creates that, what sparks that, it's difficult to know. We can always throw scenarios out there. Will it be a missile from Israel striking, Syria striking Israel, or Hezbollah setting missiles into Israel? All very real threats that Israel's living with right now that ultimately lights the spark that unites the Arabs to come against Israel. We could list a dozen possibilities. But what we do have to gravitate toward is, well, what does the prophecy say? What are the details? Who's involved? Where would we put the timing on this? Has it been fulfilled? In Asaph's case, was it more than a prayer? I've been asked all these questions. They're not softball questions. Asaph was a prophet, a seer. 2 Chronicles 29:30. He wrote a prayer. He wrote 12 Psalms. He wrote a prayer here, but he also made it a prophecy. He saw that this was coming, that there's going to be an ultimate attempt to destroy the nation of Israel, and it's a prophecy that has not found fulfillment in the Old Testament yet. And they want to destroy the nation of Israel, that it can be remembered no more, so therefore it could not have happened when there was no Israel, from 70 A.D. to 1948 A.D. So it becomes a prophecy for our time. It's a prophecy that has been in process. The same attitude by the same participants in Psalm 83 has existed over the last 65, 66 years now, since Israel became a nation. They don't want Israel there, Gary. A couple fragile peace treaties between Israel and Egypt and Israel and Jordan, about to come apart at the seams at the rate things are going in the Middle East. But apart from that, we're looking at down the barrel of a world-changing prophecy that's about to find fulfillment, in my estimation.
Now, your premise is that this psalm, Psalm 83, literally describes what's going on right now. And the staging of Israel's enemies really has been going on for actively, I suppose, in our era since back in the early part of the 20th century, when the powers of the West attempted to structure the Middle East in a certain way so that everybody would have a quote-unquote fair parcel of ground, I suppose. And there was a very miraculous series of events that brought Israel back into the land in stages. But during all of this, there has been a systematic buildup of Israel's enemies. Now, all of these are mentioned in Psalm 83 through the eyes of Asaph, almost 3,000 years ago. He looked forward in time, and he kind of laid his heart before the Lord and said, Lord, you've got to do something. There's this gathering. These people are trying to cut me off from being a nation. Now, this is an astounding thought to me, that a prophet could prophesy that many years ago about something that we see as going on right now. And I almost have to check myself and say, can prophecy really be on the verge of being fulfilled in my lifetime? An Old Testament prophecy? That's exciting. That is a really exciting prospect.
Well, the world woke up on May 14th, 1948, to a huge fulfillment of Bible prophecy, and that was the rebirth of the nation of Israel. And that was a process in the undertaking as well. I mean, back to 1897, the Zionistic movement, the Zionistic Congress with Theodor Herzl, World War I, you could start seeing all these things developing, that Israel was going to become a nation again. Lord Balfour comes out. The Ottoman Empire is taken out. All these things are going on. The Middle East becomes open for an Israel to become a nation again. Lord Balfour wants to construct that in 1917. World War II, ultimately, the Jews have to have a home now after the Holocaust, So you saw it was coming, and it came. Well, we're seeing the Psalm 83 thing. It's been a prophecy in process. The wars of 48, 67, 73, the participants listed in Psalm 83, and we've got them identified, who their ancient names, their modern-day equivalents are in the book and the DVDs that you'll be offering and things like that.
And to those of you who may not have read Bill's book and may not be familiar with Psalm 83, we have a group of enemies listed here, people who want to destroy Israel, and we have the tabernacles of Edom, the Ishmaelites, Moab, the Hagarenes, Gabal, Ammon, Amalek, Philistines, inhabitants of Tyre. It just goes down a list of people here, and I'm sure that people reading your book have in the back of their mind a criticism like, well, how does Bill Salus know that this is talking about today's enemies? It may be talking about the enemies of some other time. How do you know, and I'm sure you've been asked this question, how do you know that Psalm 83 applies to what's happening today?
Well, you have to look at it. First of all, has it been historically fulfilled? Okay, and there is 2 Chronicles 20. There was a partial fulfillment. You had 3 populations of the 10 listed in there. So you think, well, gee, but that couldn't have been a full fulfillment, a final fulfillment. It couldn't have been a prophecy fulfilled when there was no Israel, because it's dealing with Israel. Now there is an Israel. Then we have distinct names of these populations, but not only that, but we have habitation conditions of them. For instance, the tabernacles of Edom in verse 6, Psalm 83. Some translations, it's the tents of Edom.
Right.
Either way you look at it, you're dealing with Edomites in a habitation condition. The Edomites have ethnical representation in the Palestinians today. I go to great lengths to demonstrate the migration and stuff like that in the book. The tents of in the Bible represent either military encampments or refugee conditions. Well, the tents of Edom became a reality in 1948. When Israel became a nation, the Arabs that were living in the area, which was up to that point called Palestine, they were told by the Arabs around them, Syria and Egypt and Saudi Arabia and Iraq and stuff like that, get out. We're not going to allow Israel to be a nation. They said, give us 5 days and we will wipe Israel off the map, which is the very motive of Psalm 83, verse 4. Well, that was a terrible miscalculation, and now you have a Palestinian refugee crisis, the tents of Edom. Well, Asaph wrote he did not have Palestinians. That was, they had Philistia and things like that, but they're Palestinians today and they're refugees today. He was trying to tell us, in my estimation, the very first member listed of the 10 populations, which is significant, their cause, their plight, when you see these Palestinian refugees, now you're in that time frame.
Yeah, and most of these names here in Psalm 83, and by the way, in the book he goes into great detail to elucidate upon who these names belong to. They're tribal names. They are the heads of ancient tribes, and their descendants are still alive and well today in the Mideast.
Edomites, Ammonites, Moabites, megabytes, gigabytes. I mean, now people humor with that. Oh, I understand gigabytes and megabytes, but they don't know who the Edomites and the Ammonites and the Moabites are, and that's why those charts are and images are good to show on a map who the modern day equivalents are. Because Asaph, who wrote the psalm, did not have Hezbollah, Hamas, Jordanians.
Right.
These are modern day terms. So how is he going to explain to us who he's talking about, but by the terms he's familiar with, the tribes he's familiar with, the territories he's familiar with?
Now, down here in verse 9, in what I consider, a plea to God, Asaph says, "Do unto them as unto the Midianites." And so he's imploring God, treat these enemies of Israel the same way you treated the Midianites. Well, which takes us back to the incident, of the defeat of the Midianites
with Gideon. Absolutely. Well, it's interesting to me. He lays out this plan to wipe Israel off the map in the first 5 verses.
Right.
Then he talks about who's involved in this confederacy that wants to make this plan happen, and then he tells us how petitions the Lord, how he'd like the Lord to respond to that. In verses 9 through 11, we find he's talking about that, deal with them like with the Midianites. And he deals with Zebah and Salmunna and Orb and Zeb. And these were the princes and the kings of the Midianites. And then he goes on and talks about deal with them with Sisera and with Jabin. Sisera was the general of Jabin. Jabin was the king of the Canaanites. These are 2 different historic episodes in Israel's history. What I find interesting, Gary, is that Asaph doesn't say, deal with them like you did with Pharaoh at the Red Sea.
Uh-huh.
Okay. What's interesting is at that time, there was a bunch of refugees, these Hebrews coming out of 400 years of bondage in Egypt, and they had no Israeli defense forces. They were simply refugees. And the Lord, as we know, of course, the Pharaoh's army was coming against the Hebrews. Lord parts the Red Sea. Hebrews go through. Pharaoh's army goes into the Red Sea. The waters converge, and they were destroyed. The Lord stopped that. The Lord is going to stop Ezekiel 38 and 39, another different prophecy. The Lord, Jesus Christ, is going to stop the Armageddon campaign with the Antichrist and those sort of things. But the Israeli defense forces are involved in Psalm 83.
Uh-huh.
And so what he's doing, he has historical precedent that he can draw from. The book of Judges, chapters 4 through 8, is where you find these historical accounts. So he says, deal with them like these historical accounts, where you empowered the IDF of those times. Interesting, the IDF of that time in Judges 6 through 8, the Midianites was Gideon and his 300-man army.
Yes.
Now, come on. That was outnumbered, outmanned, out-arrowed, and
you know what,
Gideon
Bill,
won that war.
As you say that, you're talking about one of my favorite parts of the Bible. Poor little Gideon, is a guy threshing wheat, hiding out from the Midianites. He's scared to death, and God comes to him and says, I want you to crush the Midianites for me, Gideon. And Gideon doesn't think he can do that. Well, I identify with somebody like that. Mm-hmm. And today's Israel is like a little Gideon. That is to say, Israel is not very big among nations. And God is saying, in effect, to Israel, I have a destiny for you. I want you to go ahead and step out and do just as Gideon did in the old days. And they're going to reenact that role.
Well, it's an amazing lesson. The Midianites had oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. They were very powerful. And so Gideon goes out and he defeats them from top to bottom. They're kings or princes. And they killed 120,000 Midianites with these 300 men. Now, come on. That is clearly an empowerment of the Lord of the IDF of that time.
Right.
And the Midianites never oppressed Israel again. See, it was a decisive defeat. Same thing's going on here when he talks about Canaan and Sisera. The Canaanites, actually, I think I might have them turned around. It might have been the Canaanites for 7 years and the Midianites for 20. But regardless, there was an oppression of Israel. And now we pick up the Canaanite story in Judges 4, 5, and 6 with Deborah the prophetess dealing with her general Barak of the Israelites. And they had oppressed Israel. Mm-hmm. But the time had come for them not to oppress Israel anymore, and they won that war. Top to bottom, outnumbered, outmanned, outgunned. And that's, to me, the lesson we have here. Asaph is saying, deal with them top to bottom, infantry to their leaders. They've been oppressing us. Make it so they can never oppress us again. And until that happens, I don't think we'll have a final fulfillment of Psalm 83. And yet I think that's about to happen, Gary. I think that fulfillment is about to come.
And there you have the thesis of Bill's book, Psalm 83. And he's gone into a great deal more detail than we can possibly go into on this program today. And I'd also like to talk about another video here called America and the Coming Mideast Wars. In addition to the book, we've got a video that in which Bill is outlining what he calls the Coming Mideast Wars, plural. And you've got an interesting thesis about how a series of wars are going to unfold in the Middle East based on Bible prophecy. And I think that you've gone a step farther and laid them out sort of chronologically. And I think you've made a pretty good case. And you go a little bit farther than you did in your book in that DVD.
Well, this DVD is important for this time right now because of what's going on in the Middle East. Everybody wants to know what's going to happen over there next in the Middle East, and the Bible's quite clear on what's going to happen next. We have wars coming, Gary. We have Psalm 83, a final Arab-Israeli war, which is followed in the aftermath, probably on the heels of it relatively rapidly, with a major war, probably another Muslim-type war in Ezekiel 38 and 39. That is a really big war. Each one of these wars seems to get bigger. And then ultimately, you have the Armageddon War, where the Antichrist will ultimately try to destroy the nation of Israel and the Jews. Inside of those, you've got peripheral prophecies, too, with the destruction of Damascus in Isaiah 17. Probably got something to do with Psalm 83. Isaiah 19, dealing with Egypt. These are the countries that are in the news right now that are about to go into a scenario where you actually now are going to have probably much more than a regional conflict or another skirmish. You're going to have a war of epic biblical proportion that's going to come, and it's going to just be gripping.
Now, the fact is that any war in the Middle East is going to interfere with a global economy, the smooth flow of a global economy. And one of the big factors in the Middle East, Bill, and I know you go into this, is oil. And the way oil plays into all these prophecies, and we have, in the midst of all of these, we have Russia, and we have the United States, that is the Western traders, and we have the United Arab Emirates, we have the descendants of Sheba and Dedan. We've got all of these parties, and global commerce is at stake. This is an amazing setup, and I think God has brought all these things together specifically for a purpose in the latter days. And one of the purposes is to demonstrate His great power. I think another is to be a witness. I think the world is about to witness the power of the Lord in a remarkable way. And I would hope, and I've been praying for this for a long time, that out of this series of events in the Middle East might come another renewal, a Christian revival, if you will, a realization that God is not quite finished with this world yet, and that we'd better turn back to Him and acknowledge Him for who He is. And I'm hoping that all of this will become a witness to not only to Christians around the world, but to people who are potential Christians right now. And I think maybe your book plays into that. I think your book, if read and applied, your DVDs, if watched and applied, can become a great witnessing tool. What better witness than watching something unfold? Which brings up, by the way, the question, is prophecy being fulfilled in our day?
Well, it is. Israel in 1948 was a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. I think there were other prophecies during the church age we could talk about, and that would probably be another show, but I think we're going to see Psalm 83. The question is, will these things happen in the church age?
Yes.
See, I believe these are all pre-trib prophecies. So really, it's an important time to understand these prophecies and to use them as the witnessing tools you're talking about. Psalm 83, verse 18 is quite clear. It says, in the end, Asaph's petition is of the Lord, that after this war, that they may know that Jehovah, who alone is the Lord, the God of the Bible, is the Most High of the earth, the one true God. It'll be the end of the controversy of are Allah and Jehovah the same God? Is Islam, is Allahu Akbar, God, Allah is the greater God that the Muslims yell out when they're
right,
doing suicide bombings in the streets anyway. That controversy is going to be over. The point I'm getting to, Gary, is that God is going to evidence that He's God. He's going to do it in Psalm 83. He's going to use these wars to show that He's God. In Ezekiel 39, Ezekiel 38, the other war, we talked about this in a recent program. He's going to uphold His holy name in the midst of His people Israel. They shall not profane it anymore, and the nation shall know He's the Lord. This will be the end result. That really, it's not about the wars, it's not about the prophecies, it's about God. It's about having Him evidence that He's God to a world that needs to know this. And He's going to do that. He's going to powerfully do that through these prophecies, and we're right on the verge of watching them happen.
Bill, it has amazed me lately, as a longtime people watcher, how quickly things have changed in the last, say, 5 to 8 years. How quickly we have moved away from a God consciousness into a secularization in our television programming, our advertising programming, in our academic institutions, in grade school. I mean, culture-wide, we are not just drifting away from God anymore. We are racing away from God at an accelerating rate. And to me, that is one of the sure signs of the end right there. But I think that God's going to give us one last shot, and my prayer is for a revival. I want to see God's people go out there with renewed strength and say, look, prophecy is being fulfilled. You need to understand this. And I think you and I are both on the same page there. This would be your desire as well.
Well, it is, Gary. And we are seeing a bit of revival in certain pockets of persecuted areas, like Iran and Syria and things like that. Across the body of Christ, we would wish that for America as well. We seem so complacent anymore, and the churches are not teaching these messages, broad brushing, but generally they're not teaching Psalm 83 or the destruction, the kind of prophecies that are stage setting and that we need to know about and be familiar with, because the world is watching the same news we're watching, and we have information we can share with them. And where do we get it? Right out from the Word of God. If
you call the 800 number on your screen right now and ask for the Mideast Wars package, you get the book, you get the 2 DVD set, you get the 2 CDs, and the newest release by Bill, America and the Coming Mideast Wars. All of these would be about a $76 value. Yours for only $59.95 plus shipping and handling. Bill, always a pleasure to talk to you. Any final thoughts as you leave today?
Well, I think you've sort of hit it on the head with what you're saying, Gary. This is invaluable predictive information that is for our time to know these prophecies, and there's not just one of them. There's a flurry of these prophecies. They're outlined in this set you're offering. And we need to get this message out far and wide, because time is short. These prophecies are converging. Every last day's prophecy is starting to converge right now. And really what's more important right now is to let people know that God loves them. He's in control of an out-of-control world, and that you can put your hope in Him, and you can get through these times, and you can have eternal salvation in Jesus Christ.
And the central idea is that God does have a plan for the Middle East. It looks chaotic right now. It looks like there's no plan. But there is a plan. It's an exciting time to be alive. In fact, Bill, for me, I guess I wouldn't choose another time to be alive than right now. We are right at the edge, I think, of seeing some of the most exciting things in the world.
If you know Christ, and you trust the God of the Bible, it is the most exciting time to be alive. But if you don't know him, it's the most fearful time to be alive.
Amen. Couldn't have said it better myself. You know, he is at the door. He's almost here. So keep looking up. Prophecy in the News is a viewer-supported program made possible by our many friends around the world. Be sure you tune in every day for breaking news and our daily prophetic news updates at prophecyinthenews.com, or follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/prophecyinthenews.